minute that we get one or two solar panels on the block, that's going to help everyone else on the block. And the more that we can see that functionality, see the impact now that you have money to spend on whatever your other home repair is, your entrepreneurial pursuits, or vacation, whatever you may do. Now you're no longer stressed with the energy burden that many of us always face.
I drive 2 hours, I can be at sand dunes on Lake Michigan. I drive 2 hours the other way, I can be on cliffs on Lake Huron. There are just like so many different environments in Detroit. And I think we should really highlight not just Michigan, but the way that these spaces extend from the city itself.
Those were voices of some of the thinkers, leaders, and community members we speak with every day here on the Metro. Listen 10 a.m. to noon for more of these essential conversations. Welcome back to the show. I'm Robin Vincent. Enbridge's Line 5 pipeline has been fueling debate for decades. It carries millions of gallons of crude oil and natural gas liquids each day from Superior, Wisconsin to Sarnia, Ontario. A critical segment of this pipeline lies exposed on the lakebed of the Straits of Mackinac. It's a location University of Michigan scientists called the worst possible place for an oil spill. That's because of strong currents that could rapidly spread contaminants across the Great Lakes. Now, Enbridge wants to build a $500 million tunnel deep under the lakebed to shield the pipeline, prevent an oil spill, and repair aging infrastructure. A new environmental report from the Army Corps of Engineers says it will likely accomplish these things, but that would come at a cost. Habitats could be destroyed, wildlife disrupted, and tribal rights threatened. Meanwhile, legal fights continue. Michigan's governor and indigenous communities want Line 5 shut down. They've cited environmental and treaty violations. Enbridge insists federal law protects the pipeline. The Army Corps of Engineers is asking people to weigh in on its new report about the tunnel project through the end of the month. So it's a good time to ask, is this tunnel a safe solution or a continuation of something that violates indigenous rights and threatens the environment? To help us think about these questions, Andrew Buchsbaum joins us now. He's an expert on environmental law at the University of Michigan, and he's been part of the movement to stop Line 5. Professor Buchsbaum, welcome to the program. Professor Buchsbaum, are you there?
I am. Can you?
I can hear you now. I can hear you now. Welcome.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
And we should note the Metro has invited an Enbridge spokesperson to discuss Line 5 and its proposed oil tunnel. We'll let you know when we hear back. Now, Professor Buchsbaum, first, let's just get the basics out of the way. What exactly flows through Line 5? Where does it end up, and how is it used?
Great questions, Robin. It's good to do a level set here. Line 5 carries up to 23 million gallons a day of oil and natural gas liquids from mostly the tar sand fields in Alberta through the United States, from Sarnia then through the Straits of Mackinac down to Port Huron and beyond. It supplies refineries and fractionators in Canada, and some in the United States as well. This troublesome segment, the dangerous segment on the bottom of the Straits, is 70 years old. No segment's ever been replaced. It's got corrosion. It's been struck by anchors twice in the last 6 years. Those anchors are left dense and have pulled the line out of whack. And that's why this is considered America's most dangerous pipeline.
Okay, so this explains, Professor Buchsbaum, why you've studied this extensively and why Line 5 is so closely watched. Now, Enbridge argues that the proposed tunnel will significantly reduce spill risks. The Army Corps of Engineers supports this claim in its new study. What do you say to that?
We've taken a close look at this tunnel proposal for the last really 8 or 10 years, because it first surfaced during the administration of Governor Rick Snyder. And there are some real problems with it. And in some ways, this takes the Great Lakes from the frying pan to the fire. This tunnel, having a tunnel of this depth and this length and this size, carrying fossil fuels, carrying oil and gas, which can leak, this is unprecedented. There are tunnels, but they don't carry explosive materials in them like this tunnel does. This tunnel is proposed to be bored through rock, which we were told was bedrock, that it's stable, very solid rock. Instead, what little sampling has been done shows that the rock is porous, it's unstable, that it's slushy like sand or mud, and that there's going to have to be enormous amounts of cement pumped through around the tunnel just to stabilize the tunnel shaft. And that cement itself can pour into the Great Lakes because there are voids and cracks between the tunnel area and where the Great Lakes are located. In a worst case scenario, you could have a tunnel collapse, even as the tunnel is being built, which would lead to subsidence of the bottom of the Great Lakes. So there's an enormous amount of additional study that needs to be done. Enbridge has done some boring studies, but of the 4-mile stretch, the key 4-mile stretch of the tunnel, there's only a handful that have gotten anywhere close to the depth that the tunnel will be sunk. And so for that reason, there needs to be a lot more research, a lot more study done to determine whether this tunnel can be built at all, much less whether it would be safe.
I want to go back to something that you said. So it's not bedrock that as Enbridge said it would use. Can you say more?
Yes. The whole design concept behind the tunnel, which was originally proposed by a consultant named Dynamic Risk back in 2017, had a number of assumptions. And the primary assumption, and the one that Enbridge has been operating under, is that the tunnel will be drilled through bedrock. Bedrock is a dense, solid rock that doesn't allow for cave-ins, that doesn't have cracks, that supports the tunnel, so that essentially the tunnel would be encased in rock which is stable and secure. But instead, what little sampling has been done shows that the rock is unstable. It's classified as poor or very poor.
And who's collecting those samples?
Enbridge has collected the samples. They submitted them to the state of Michigan. The Michigan Department of Transportation hired a consultant to review the samples, and the results that they published were what I just said, that the rock is classified, most of it as poor or very poor, porous and filled with voids.
So for you, it's not only the fact that building this oil tunnel would mean that Line 5, it would sort of ensure Line 5's operation into the future. And I realize that is very concerning to people who want to see it shut down. But in your eyes, it is also this project, the tunnel itself, that you find to be so problematic, and that's in contrast to some of the things that the Army Corps of Engineers is saying. Is that right?
That's right. The Army Corps, they're in their report, they mention these things, but they don't get at the rock quality. They don't talk about the rock quality. They don't talk about, in the depth they need to, the need for additional sampling. Mm. But something you said is really important to recognize here, and that is that this is a multi-billion-dollar, 5 to 6 year minimum project. In the meantime, Line 5 continues to lie on the bottom of the Straits of Mackinac, continues to be what Governor Whitmer called a ticking time bomb that could rupture at any time it's hit by an anchor. And here's the main thing, is it's not needed. There are alternatives to Line 5 that are infrastructure that already exists that would carry virtually all of the oil and gas and propane.
Professor Buchsbaum, forgive me for jumping in, but I want to ask you a little bit more about that. You're saying Line 5 is not needed. So if it were to be shut down tomorrow, you're saying there would not be economic or energy impacts. Could you say more about that?
Absolutely. The industry thought leader for pipeline logistics is called PLG Consulting, and they have issued a report that says that virtually all of the oil and propane supplied by Line 5 to refineries around Canada and the U.S. Would be replaced within 3 months, and all of it within 18 months of Line 5 shutting down through market forces, by rail, by other pipelines, and by waterborne transport, not through the Great Lakes, but around through the St. Lawrence Seaway, which was the path that this oil took prior to 2015 anyway. So there's no new infrastructure needed for this. And yet, Enbridge is fixated on maintaining Line 5's operation and through the tunnel or through the pipeline that exists now, because it's so profitable. Here's the key, is that those other sources of oil, those other transport routes, would not all be Enbridge routes. Other U.S. pipelines, U.S. carriers, U.S. oil and gas would replace a lot of what now comes from Canada. So in many respects, shutting down Line 5 actually is an economic benefit to the U.S. oil industry.
So you believe that this is a clear signaling of profit over the planet, over people, of keeping Line 5 going?
Well, it's actually even more simple. It's Enbridge's profit over not just people, but other companies' profits. The only entity that benefits from Line 5 in the tunnel is Enbridge. There are all sorts of other businesses that would benefit tremendously through other sources of fossil fuels.
We're talking about a proposed oil tunnel for Enbridge's Line 5 beneath the Straits of Mackinac. The Army Corps of Engineers just released a report about the potential impacts of the plan. It's taking public comment on the project through the end of June. Our guest is Andrew Buchsbaum. He's an expert on environmental law at the University of Michigan. Professor Buchsbaum, people who live in the Upper Peninsula are worried about that 3 to 18 months time period, many of whom heat their homes with propane exclusively. Could you respond to that concern?
Sure. What we've seen already is because Line 5 has been so controversial, is that there are other sources of propane that are already making their way to the UP and the Lower Peninsula. There are all sorts of companies that are ready to provide propane that doesn't rely on Line 5. Remember, Line 5 doesn't pipe propane directly to people's homes. It sends it to a collection point, a fractionator, and from there it's shipped to people's homes. You can get propane from all sorts of other sources without having Line 5 supply it. Propane is incredibly plentiful. The state of Michigan did a study that showed that there are plenty of propane sources at comparable prices that could be stood up very rapidly if Line 5 were shut down, and many of them are already coming online.
I'm wondering if there's no way to stop Line 5 from operating. I mean, we're about to get into the legal disputes. I do want to discuss that. But before we do, if there's no way to stop Line 5, does this oil tunnel make sense in terms of lowering the risk of environmental disasters?
So that's a great question, and we're not there yet. Line 5 is a ticking time bomb, and we need to get it out as quickly as possible. The tunnel, it doesn't make sense because not just because it poses its own risk, but because it takes so long to put into place. Assume if the tunnel is operational in 6 years, that's 6 years of additional Line 5 operation. In 6 years, the energy demands of this country are going to be dramatically different. Line 5 might not even exist. So the demand for Line 5 might not even exist. So why would we spend billions and risk the Great Lakes on this project to supply fuel that perhaps nobody's going to need in 6 years? So we we can't get to the point where it's line 5 or the tunnel, and now those are the only options. I
Now,
will say that there already is a shutdown order for line 5, or at least in Wisconsin, line 5, which runs through a tribal lands for the Bad River Band in northern Wisconsin. And there, a federal judge has ordered line 5 off their reservation, which would shut down the line everywhere, by June of 2026. So there is a pending shutdown order, and there's a trial in Michigan, hearings in Michigan that are going on as to whether line 5's easement through the straits is valid or should be canceled.
let's
So there are,
let's talk about
yeah,
that for a moment, if we could, Professor Buchsbaum,
sure.
because the legal disputes around Line 5 involve multiple parties, including state authorities, indigenous communities, and Enbridge itself. Could you summarize why Line 5 has become at the center of this contentious legal battle?
Great question, and we don't have an hour, so I'll try to be really rapid here because there's so many legal disputes happening at the same time. The bottom line is that that Governor Whitmer and Attorney General Nessel both took action 6 years ago, 5 years ago, to terminate the easements and revoke the easement on the straits that allows line 5 to be present, to operate. Enbridge immediately took legal action to delay those proceedings and pulled them into federal court. It's taken years, but the federal courts have finally said, this is not a federal issue, it's a state issue, and returned it to state court. There are still federal proceedings pending, where Enbridge is claiming that federal law preempts state law and is making the same claim in state court. But we're finally in a state court that is actually considering the merits of the issue. That is, whether line 5 violates the public trust doctrine. That is, the doctrine that says that the Great Lakes belong to the people of Michigan and that they can't be impaired. Whether it violates the public trust doctrine, and if so, whether it needs to be shut down.
Do you believe that courts are going to find that persuasive, that Line 5 violates the public trust doctrine?
Yes, and that's one of the reasons that Enbridge has pulled out every legal trick in the book to try to stop a judge from actually hearing the merits of the case. All of the measures in federal court have been purely procedural, and Enbridge continues to try to stop a judge from asking, wait, is this 70-year-old pipeline that gets hit by anchors that carries 23 million gallons a day, this dangerous, America's most dangerous pipeline, is this the right place for it at the bottom of the Straits of Mackinac? And it's pretty obvious it isn't. Once the court asks that question, we know what the answer is going to be.
As the public comment period continues, what critical points do you think Michigan residents should consider about this?
Well, I think the main thing that people really need to think about is whether this experiment in the bottom of the Great Lakes with all the risks it imposes, whether it's necessary or whether there are alternatives. I think saying, look, we want alternatives to Line 5. Not just alternatives to the tunnel, but alternatives to Line 5. And many, whether those alternatives are different ways of transporting fossil fuels, oil and gas, whether there's alternatives or clean energy. We haven't even talked about clean energy, but the transport of the same amount of oil and natural gas is in some ways a worst case scenario. As clean energy replaces fossil fuels, there will be less and less demand for that fuel and less demand for the pipelines that support it.
Before I let you go, Professor Buchsbaum, I realize that you talk about Line 5 with your students in class in depth, in very thorough ways. And I wonder how you're framing this to your students. Is this the biggest environmental battle right now, in this part of the country, at least, of our lifetime?
Well, it's certainly the biggest environmental battle of the last decade. There's no significant active pipeline has ever been shut down anywhere once it's been operating. And the fact that Governor Whitmer has ordered the shutdown, the Attorney General Nessel has ordered shutdown, shows great courage on their part. And also it shows that the Great Lakes are more important than anything else for our region of the country. That's what this is really about. That's why the Line 5 controversy has gone the way it has. That's why these government officials have stepped up and taken action. It's to protect the Great Lakes. And that, the class I teach is about the Great Lakes. And Great Lakes for Michiganders it's a part of our identity. It's who we are. It defines our quality of life. And if there's a threat like this one to the Great Lakes, then we're going to have to take all actions we can to make sure to protect that quality of life.
Andrew Buchsbaum is an expert on environmental law at the University of Michigan. Professor Buchsbaum, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Robin, thank you.
The Metro has invited an Enbridge spokesperson to discuss Line 5 and its proposed oil tunnel that we talked about today. We'll let you know when we hear back. Enbridge is a financial supporter of WDET. Our newsroom observes a clear boundary between funders and editorial content, and we do not serve the agendas of those who support us. Coming up, can art change how we treat the environment? Some local artists say yes. We'll find out more here on the Metro. Stay with us.